most of what you're watching is people trying to offload the tension that they go around in their lives with.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's what this play is about. Like, this like weird summer that is like tossed into disarray, and everybody's lives are sort of fucked up and made stranger and more dramatic. And like the doctor is trying to seduce Yelena, and so is Vanya, and Sonia is trying to get with the doctor. And like something frees them of the constraints that has been in place for their lives. And you're mostly watching them try to deal with that. So to ramble, I did not know that the Oakland Athletics were departing Oakland.
I had heard that earlier this year, but it's sort of like my brain couldn't process it. And then it actually, in fact, happened. And I'm like, why hasn't there been a revolution?
Right, exactly.
Why has... and, you know, I'm going to be in Oakland next week.
Apparently, you're going to see a lot of incredibly sad people. But the reason I brought it up was not just, you know, okay, so baseball season is coming to a close. The Red Sox are almost 15 games behind the Yankees and out of the playoffs. Crystal Palace is in 16th place. The Timbers are barely hanging on to the last playoff spot. And it made me wonder if you are still an Orioles fan.
Huh. You know, not really, because I think my fandom in baseball seems to shift depending on where I live, because I enjoy being a part of the thing. But I was going to say, as you were saying, the Red Sox were out, I was going to basically make a pitch for the Orioles as like the Red Sox of the South. Which I think there's some truth to that. You know, they're a stately, they're not one of the oldest team, but they're teams with a great history. They're from a scrappy town. They were the baseball team, and I've told you this before, that I can remember watching the '83 World Series on TV as some of my various early memories. I remember, you know, Eddie Murray and Cal Ripken and Ken Singleton, and I think Jim Palmer was still on that team, and Mike Flanagan and Mike Boddicker. I can remember, he was also a Red Sox pitcher at one point too. And I think Dave McNally, does that ring a bell? I liked that team, and then I followed them rather religiously. They had another spurt in the 90s, in the sort of like Cal Ripken's now old. Brady Anderson had a couple of amazing seasons. They had a really good defensive infield. They were fun to watch. And then, you know, John Miller was their announcer, and he's great. But, you know, then the steroid era happened. Then I left Virginia. Then the area got the Nationals, and most of the local fans, when I moved back to Charlottesville for a job, started following the Nationals, and I just didn't really find that fandom fun. And then I did spend like 5 years in New England, and those 5 years were roughly 2004 through 2007.
A very good really year for New England fan. A very good patch for New England fandom in general.
Yeah, and so I got swept up in that, and then I moved, so I was in Virginia briefly, and then I moved to Chicago in 2015, and you know, that was the best year the Cubs had in a long time, and the next year they won the series, and I was in a bar watching that happen, and it was incredible. You know, I have audio of that on my desktop. Like I could play it for you right now. I'd have to find it, but I mean, I'd have to cue it. It's like a 2-hour audio recording. You know, so I'm kind of a bit of a baseball orphan right now. I actually have been following the Cubs. They had an okay year, but I haven't really gotten back into the Orioles, even though they're doing well. And, you know, I'm in Los Angeles, and I just rooting for the Dodgers would almost be like rooting for the Yankees. Like, you know, like
why is that?
I've met a number of people here who are like, we should go to a Dodgers game. And that sounds fun. And yeah, I'd love that. I don't know. I think Why is that? Maybe it's because of Kirk Gibson's home run, like the Dodgers were the enemy. But I don't. Maybe it's because they betrayed Brooklyn, and I'm still pissed about
1953.
that. Yeah, jackasses. Here's another problem I have with the Dodgers is I don't like those pale blue uniforms. I don't think that's an appropriate baseball color. Do they have a pinstripe variation? I don't think they do. Which I'm okay with. The Orioles don't have a pinstripe variation, and the Orioles are quite handsome and smart in the white and orange. I don't know. It always felt like the Dodgers were the enemy. Even I did have a A's period in that sort of McGuire, Ricky Henderson, Canseco before we knew that they were all juicing. Well, Ricky wasn't. So I don't know, but I feel like this is an unfair bias and that I would be happy if I could root for the Dodgers, especially since they have like the best baseball player ever on their team right now. And some, it's maybe part of this is, I think you could probably relate to this, is that I have a hard time pulling for a team that is perennially good and well-resourced. Yeah. That what is it? Mid-table mediocrity is the term that you use.
Yeah, mid-table obscurity is sort of the
Well, I like teams that are underrated, and I like teams that are scrappy, and I like teams that that when they win, it's not expected, and it's all the more sweeter. And I feel like there's a sort of expectation for the Dodgers to be good.
We should probably get to talking about Vanya, though.
Yes.
Yep.
Let me call it up.
Let's get the depression. Let's warm up the depression.
Warm up the depression. Well, so we are watching Vanya on 42nd Street, a 1992 film directed by Louis Malle, based on Uncle Vanya, but kind of an interesting variation. It is sort of a story within a story. So it is a theatrical performance recorded on film. We opened in New York City in the early 1990s. It is unmistakably New York City, and also 42nd Street, vicinity of Times Square. We see the actors and directors gather to rehearse, and they go into this old tumble-down theater that has like pigeons in it, and it's leaking. Andre Gregory is playing himself as the director, and all the actors are sort of playing themselves briefly. And there are a few guests who are invited into the production, and the audience is sort of treated like one of those guests. And Andre Gregory welcomes. There's this woman whose father apparently or grandfather translated Chekhov into
Bengali.
Hindi. Yeah, and Andre Gregory is like, at one point, this terrible moment is like, I have an Indian guru, which is like, what a stupid thing to say to a person.
Yeah, it's not great, Andre.
Yeah,
but also like the question that I come away from the opening is does Andre Gregory really not know what a knish is?
Yeah, no, I would actually think that the characters playing themselves is some of the worst acting in this entire production.
It's a knish, says Wallace Shawn.
Yeah, they gather in, but there's this tumble down theater that is beautiful in its decrepitude, an old Broadway theater. I wonder if it's been restored
it's
by
the New
now.
Amsterdam. Yeah. The Lion King ran there for almost 20 years. Now it is a big time theater. Like
that's what happens to New York real estate. It tumbles down and then it is
reborn. Yeah. Every building in New York is a 100-year-old column of dust held together with paint. And the New Amsterdam is no exception. What's really cool about this film is that this production happened in this exact format, and there's this little there's definitely some like shell game of framing it where Andre Gregory
probably not in that theater.
It was in the theater. They
really like, was it safe? They had a net to keep plaster.
No, the
from falling.
only way you could see it is exactly the way that it's presented in this film, is that you had to be invited. Only about 6 to 8 people were invited at a time. And there's this moment when Andre Gregory says, "Oh, it's a perfect night because we're running the whole play." That's a lie. They never rehearsed it without running it the whole play. It was never technically in rehearsal. It was never technically in performance. It was like some of the greatest stage actors of the early 90s and Andre Gregory were just like, let's do this. And they did it.
Interesting. Interesting. Well, and I don't think they legally could have sold tickets to it,
Yeah, for sure.
So that makes sense. But I happen to think the framing device is brilliant, but we'll talk about
the
that.
plot of the play is the same as the last time that, from the last episode. An aging academic and his much younger wife, Yelena, have moved back to a country estate that's managed by Vanya. And Vanya is the professor's brother-in-law from a previous marriage. The professor and Yelena's arrival tosses the estate out of order as Vanya and his niece Sonia, the professor's daughter, realize that the man they've spent their lives supporting is something of a buffoon. Love triangles and love conga lines abound. Most of the men attempt to seduce Yelena, including the doctor, who is in turn loved unrequitedly by Vanya's niece, Sonia.
So all of this pressure builds up to a climax. There's a moment where also the professor announces that he's going to sell the estate, which he doesn't even own, and which would sort of put Vanya, Nanny, Vanya's mother, and probably Sonia just like out on their butts. So Vanya is resentful. He becomes incredibly angry. Off stage, he tries to shoot the professor and misses. And that ends that act.
Eventually, due to this fallout, the professor and his wife move back to town, and life resumes at the estate pretty much as it was. But everybody has been significantly changed by the 4 or 5 months that elapsed during the play. And the play ends with Sonia and Vanya's mother and Nanny kind of sitting around, getting back to work as things kind of return to a sort of lesser normal than you imagine they were before. And that's it.
It's interesting, though. The thing that you just said, that everybody's significantly changed, I think that's one of the questions of the play, whether people have significantly changed or not. I'm not entirely convinced that anybody has changed.
I think in this,
I think some things have been surfaced that were subtextual.
I think in this film gestures towards change. I think that as in this interpretation of it, I would argue that people are changed. But I don't know. Maybe that's something we can talk about. I wanted to ask you about the frame. You already said that you think the frame is brilliant, and I've been dying to talk to you about this film for weeks now. Yeah, tell me about what do you think the frame achieves for this film?
I think it's brilliant because I think it solves a problem with any interpretation of Chekhov for film, and particularly any live theatrical production. So there's a thing that will happen sometimes with a really great theatrical production. It doesn't always happen, but it does happen sometimes, which is you actually immerse in the story and have these moments where, even though intellectually you're watching actors on a stage, the emotional gravitas of the performance takes over. And you feel it. And I feel like it's often you feel it collectively, right? There's the cliche is you can hear a pin drop at certain moments in a live production. It doesn't always happen. And I think that when that happens in the theater, it is impossible to replicate on film. I think that what happens is something that is a sensual experience that has to do with hearing the actors' voices reverberating around the room, being aware of the presence of other people next to you in the darkness, the light going down, the smells, the sounds of the boards creaking. And maybe you could do it with virtual reality, but I think the tools you have with film don't allow it. So even though the National Theater production we saw of The Cherry Orchard, to me, is about as good, it's still, I don't think you'll ever immerse in the story the same way that you'll sometimes do with a really, really good feature and a really, really good theater production. And I think in this case, the framing device allows us, it sort of acknowledges that weakness and allows us to immerse in something else that's really great about theater. And which is, it's sort of like you have been invited to watch a really great scene study with some really great actors. It's the kind of experience I think that anybody who's gone to drama school like you have and I have not has had, or anybody who's lived in a great theatrical town has had, where you just see, oh, there's this thing happening Tuesday night, and you go there and like whatever. You gave us the story of Ben Kingsley doing a master class, or where sometimes you just you luck into a really great moment, and maybe it's. I had this happen to me in an improv class I took, where me and this other student who was a doctor, probably about 70, did this improv, and he kind of led with the idea that we were lovers who were breaking up. And I was like, I feel like it was a really good scene. And like, we just found something in that moment. And it usually did not go that way when we were doing improv in the improv class, but it's this thing that happens in live theater sometimes. And I think it's a thing that happens to theater people a lot. And so what I think Louis Malle has done has created this experience where we all get to see what that's like. And I think also that I don't feel as though I ever really immerse in the story the way that I would want to at a theatrical experience, but it doesn't matter because I feel like I'm getting the privilege of watching these amazing actors do amazing scene study. So even though I always feel like I can see them acting, it doesn't matter because I feel like I'm witnessing something really cool. So that's what it does for me.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's, like you can make a case that like, this is sort of like Chekhov is like very like bourgeois middle-class theater. Like that's, and like Chekhov is a member of the bourgeoisie himself. And you could make a argument that the way that this is framed with all of the like 42nd Street stuff and Larry Pine sort of like lecherously checking out a lady as he is like walking into the theater, and all of the like sort of hullabaloo about like, oh, you're just going to come and see, like it fits with that sort of bourgeois nature. But I don't think that's what Louis Malle is going for. I think you're right. He really wants to focus on the like emotional performances, which, I don't know the story of how Louis Malle decided to do this, but I really hope it was like, I mean, like he directs Wallace Shawn and Andre Gregory about a decade earlier. And, and at one point Andre is like, hey, we're putting on Vanya, you should come and see it. And Louis Malle goes and sees it, and his mind is like, I need to film this.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of what is going on here too is that actually what I find really annoying sometimes about kind of like the MFA and kind of drama school in that world is a kind of exclusiveness, a kind of like, this is our thing. And I think Louis Malle's impulse here is exactly the opposite. And it would be sort of annoyingly snobby, in fact, if, Andre Gregory and Wallace Shawn did this performance and only invited like their friends. I mean, whatever, they are allowed to do that. It's a free country, but there is something bourgeoisie and snobby and kind of cool kids club about that. But we're being invited into it, and we're not being invited into it to sort of be like, check out how cool these kids are. We're being invited to kind of participate in something that is a performance of a play, but it's not staged the way you would stage a play. They're not on the stage. They're kind of like in where the pit would be.
They are on the stage, but it's a proscenium theater but the people who are watching it are also on the stage.
Right.
And so like it's not, everything about this film is not what you expect it to be, which I think is really, which I think is a choice.
I want to play you something that it reminded me of. And I have it, it's a YouTube, and part of what's really neat about too is that because of the conceit, the camera can be very, very intimate, even in a way that it's even more intimate than it was in the National Theater. Because I don't think they were quite, with the National Theater production, I don't think they were quite willing to put the cameras right up in people's faces, which they do in this production. So I noticed that, and this is something it reminded me of. So I'm going to try doing a share. Let's see. This is a scene. Are you seeing this?
I am. Yeah.
This is a scene from a recent documentary.
Oh my God.
I should say it's a scene from something that was billed as a documentary by Martin Scorsese called Rolling Thunder Review. So I'm going to play it and then I'm going to problematize the idea of documentary. Okay. I'm going to just play a little sound to make sure you can hear.
I don't. Jack Kerouac writes like ticker tape.
I used to see you write like ticker tape. I used to feed you salad and red wine while you wrote like ticker tape.
Yeah, I remember.
Brilliant stuff. William Zanzinger.
Overlooking the Pacific, the wild Pacific Ocean and Big Sur, right?
William Zanzinger.
Where was that written?
Hattie Carroll, one of the best songs I think you ever wrote.
I think it's one of the best songs you sing.
Thank you. How come you take it on the stage now?
Because you won't sing it?
Oh, Bob. Sure I will. Just because I screwed up the words.
Well,
it really
displeases me that you went off and got married and
You went off and got married first and didn't tell me.
Yeah, but
you should have told me or something.
But I married the woman I loved.
I know, that's true. That's true. And I married the man I thought I loved.
See, that's what thought has to do with it. Thought will fuck you up.
You're right, I agree with that.
See, it's heart, it's not head.
Did you get to the end?
Yeah. That is weird.
So I've watched that a few times, and I always thought it was an amazing bit of like fly on the wall cinema verite documentary. Yeah. It's not. Okay. It was scripted.
Yeah, it feels like it's trying to do both.
Yeah, well, it's based on, it was a script written by, Sam Shepard.
Oh shit, really? Right on.
Based on the real life relationship between Joan Baez and Bob Dylan. And this movie, Rolling Thunder Review, was an attempt to film that script in the midst of a live tour. So that essentially Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, Roger McGuinn, all these people were going on a real tour by train. They were performing as themselves, but then the documentary film crew was following them around. And from time to time, they would film these scenes from Sam Shepard's script.
Oh my God.
With the idea that this was going to be merged into this sort of like mixture of fiction and nonfiction. And I was wondering why. The reason it reminded me, at one point, there's this real low camera angle where we could see Bob Dylan. And there's also a moment where he doesn't know what to say for a while. And the first time I watched it, I was like, oh, Joan Baez has kind of like, knocked him off his rhythm or something. And I'm like, oh, no, Bob doesn't remember his lines. That's what's happening. And Joan is doing a really good job acting, for him, right? Yeah. Like she's covering at one point. She's like, you should have said something. And he finally says, like, I married the woman I love, and she agrees. And then he says, that will fuck you up. And I don't know that I feel like, I mean, these two things came out not that long apart, or this was shot not that long apart. To me, they're both influenced by Chekhov. I'm sure Sam Shepard was influenced by Chekhov, but I feel like they're doing a similar thing. And it was like, when I watched these performances, I thought they were great performances, and I loved the intimacy of the camera. I could also tell I never quite immersed in the story. I always felt like, oh, I'm watching great actors, make some really interesting choices and perform this script that I still feel is a little bit problematic. Like, I still don't think it's that interesting a story. Yeah. And I think it's really hard to perform, at least in modern English,
Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why I love this so much is that like you don't really go to Chekhov for story. Not
if you don't want to be disappointed. It's not story. It's like documentary fiction. Yeah. It's like
what's Woman
like
with a Dog about?
Emotional.
It's about a woman with a dog.
Right. It's like what it means to be unhappy, or what it's like to be unhappy.
It's so, one of the things that you learn like right away when you start acting is that that if you aim for the emotion, it will always come out terribly. And that the way in that, was, Stanislavski and then, all the people we've been talking about for a while and Sandy Meisner and Stella Adler and all these people, what they stumble upon is this idea of giving characters objectives and kind of where they want to go and what they want. Right. And I think that what you go to Chekhov for is like the fact that all of these objectives are so structured to hit each other for maximum emotional damage. And like what you go to Chekhov for is to watch people in like sort of emotional extremis and seeing how they handle it. And it gives you, one of the things about Greek theater is that it is supposed to get you this cathartic thing. I think at this point, we probably, because we've just like gotten a long way away from that way of like scripts being performed. I bet that if we were to see like a Greek tragedy production from 600 BC, we would be like, whoa, this is weird.
Yeah.
And I think that this is sort of the closest that we can get because there are moments in this production. This is the production I think about when we talked about last time, that what Chekhov does is make this amazing two-dimensional thing that when you put it in the hands of actors who make really brave choices. And I think that that's, when I watch this film, it feels like I'm watching like 6 Olympic athletes at their absolute best.
Yeah.
And they are doing things that are incredibly difficult and they're making it look very natural.
Let's watch the scenes, man. I'm excited. As I agree. I thought that again, this like two-dimensional script that I think is a flawed story structure is brought to life to me again in little bits and in moments. Like it's a gem. It's a collection of brilliant scene studies. I thought where they do find the emotion, and they also make choices that sort of fill in some of the blanks and the gaps around the character's motivation. Absolutely. So suddenly things make sense that didn't make sense on the page.
All right, I'm gonna press play, and then hopefully you're gonna hear this.
Vanya.
Yes.
Tell us something.
What should I tell you?
Something new.
Something new. What's new? Nothing's new. Everything's old. Nothing's changed. I'm the same. Probably a little bit worse because I've grown lazy. Complain all day. What's new? My old crow, my old mother's still prating on about her dear rights of women, one eye on the grave, the other one looking in her book for the secret of life.
What about the professor?
The professor goes on as before. All day and half of the night, he sits at his desk and he writes. What is he working on? Why doesn't he turn to some magnificent subject like his autobiography? Now, there's a book. A worked-out academic, gout, rheumatism, migraine, the liver, inflamed with jealousy and envy, lives on the estate of his first wife? From choice? No. because he's too cheap to live in the town. And the man prates constantly about his misfortunes. What are they? He has none. The son of a poor deacon. He's a scholarship student at the seminary. Gets a degree, gets a teaching chair. Now he's your excellency, and he marries the daughter of a senator, and so on. But I say, forget that, because this man is so exceedingly fortunate as to write and lecture for 25 years upon a subject of which he knows less than nothing. 25 years, this wise man tells us about art. 25 years, he reads the works of others, he prattles about realism and naturalism. Specious nonsense which the clever have long known and the stupid really don't care about. Not a living soul knows who he is or cares, nor is he missed from a position which he held for 25 years. Isn't that something? For 25 years, this man kept some more worthy man out of a job. And yet, look at him. He goes around as if he were saying, yes, I'm here among you.
Ugh.
Why don't you tell me what you just come out of that clip?
Yeah. So this is early. We're in the first like 10 minutes of the play, or the 10 minutes of the film, and the doctor has asked Vanya to tell him something new, and Vanya begins this speech with this kind of like, "What's new? Nothing's new. Everything's old." And that's the kind of like reverie that then like spits him off into this kind of like aria of like cynicism and bitterness. And the thing that I find so amazing about it, and the reason I picked this clip, is that I think the choice that Wallace Shawn made was that he is going to be kind of discovering how angry he is at every chance that he gets to talk about the professor and Yelena. And at the end of this clip, we just heard the doctor say, I think you're jealous. And Marina, not Marina, the Nanny and Tellegen kind of have a laugh because we get a few shots of them in the middle of Vanya's monologue where they look like they're sort of bearing up under, Vanya's kind of being a tool again, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's the laugh of tension relief, right? It's the laugh of the doctors. It's a little bit of comic timing because it's understatement. Like, jealous? You fucking think? He's not a little jealous. He is consumed with jealous bitterness. Yeah, absolutely. And I do, now that you pointed out, I didn't necessarily see the winding up, the slow burn of the anger right away, but it is, because he starts with talking about his mom, who he finds annoying, and then he moves on to the professor, who he finds infuriating. And then I started to say this earlier, so maybe we can cut it. But I think that Wallace Shawn, the thing that Wallace Shawn, I think, is perfectly cast as Vanya, because he has a quality, you get it a little bit in the page, but Vanya is annoying. He is a whiner who complains about his actually probably relatively okay life in the sense that he has food and shelter at a time of great poverty. And he complains about how he's wasted his life, and he complains about how frustrated his circumstances are, and he does absolutely nothing to improve them. He does absolutely nothing to change them. He just complains. And that can be really, really, really annoying. But I think the quality that Wallace Shawn brings to it, and we know a couple of people like this who complain a lot, but you sort of enjoy them complaining. They have a kind of, there is a poetry and a stand-up comedian's pacing to the complaint. And Wallace Shawn, both in his physical appearance, he is a distinctive looking person, and also in his rhythms, it's kind of fun to watch him complain. And I think Vanya, the character, is also supposed to have that quality. That's the sense I get, because, everybody does kind of like him in the play. Even Yelena is sort of fond of him, even though he's kind of an annoying, follows her around like a cloud on a string. Obviously, I'm forgetting the daughter's name.
Sonia.
Obviously Sonia adores him, and so I think one of the great choices just of this production is the casting of Wallace Shawn, because you then just his presence makes it so that you get why everybody puts up with his otherwise abhorrent behavior.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you could go another step and say everybody is perfectly cast in this. Like, these are all excellent actors who have been given a part that they can really latch onto. Even Nanny, the woman who plays Nanny, nails these moments of treating the professor like he's this big baby.
Oh, that moment where he goes to bed and she puts him to bed is brilliant. Absolutely. And that's just what you get it. Like, you're like, all that guy needed was a little bit of like mothery sympathy. Yep. And I thought that was great too. I actually disagree with you. I think all but one of the actors were perfectly cast. Do you want to guess who the one I think was not?
Callaghan?
Waffles?
Yeah.
Is that no? I'll give you.
Is it the doctor?
I don't think the doctor is well cast. I think Larry Pine is a great actor, but I think I think the doctor should be more dashing. I think he should be sort of more like George Clooney at 50.
Oh, wow. That would be great.
I think that, well, because, not only does Sonia adore him, but also Yelena kind of is attracted to him too. And that's hinted at in the text, but it's a choice that this production definitely makes, that she resists because she's a loyal wife.
Yeah.
But she kind of is taken by his charm. I don't find him to be appealing sexually, and I also don't find him to be appealing intellectually. The character is written in such a way where it's kind of like the student from the last play. The things that he's saying could be sophomoric or they could be profound. And to me, the way he plays it comes across a little bit as sophomoric.
Yeah.
He seems just kind of like a little bit, and I think I think Larry Pine is a great actor. I think that his characters are meant to have a kind of weathered wisdom that is sort of, I think the doctor, he's supposed to be 10 years younger than Vanya. I think he's supposed to be almost kind of like what Vanya was when he was younger. And I think he's supposed to be just a little more dashing than Larry Pine manages to play him in this. I don't think he quite works. I think everybody else does. But I find myself with Sonia being like, come on. The only reason that Sonia has a crush on him is he's like the only man she's not related to in the goddamn play.
Yeah, exactly.
That's his only endearing. I mean, you could play this character as more admirable, but he comes across as a kind of lecherous, semi-lecherous, sophomoric drunk, I think, in this production. And I think all of those elements are on the page, but to me, there's something about Larry Pine's performance that amps that up more in a way that I don't know. I mean, I could be wrong about it, but I didn't really buy Julianne Moore as Helena's attraction, and I didn't really buy Sonia's attraction to him. It felt strained.
Well, let's jump to Sonia's rendering of why she's so enamored with him. Yeah. Let's go to it's 21:44.
Okay, great.
Is the time. And so what I want you to watch through here is, so Sonia has a monologue about the doctor.
Okay.
The doctor replies with a monologue of his own, but I want you to track to whom he directs that monologue.
Yeah, okay. I'm ready.
No, it's really quite interesting. Every year he plots new forests, or he makes a plan to conserve the old ones. He's received both a medal and a diploma for his work. If you listen to him, you'll see what he means. He says that forests embellish the land, and that they instill in man a love of beauty.
Look at that they raise the mind. Of admiration.
They moderate the climate, and in the lands where the climate is milder, then people struggle less with nature, and the people in those lands are milder and gentler.
Fading away for Sonia.
and their speech is more refined, and their movements are more graceful, and they cultivate the arts and sciences, and there's joy in their philosophy, and they treat women with nobleness.
Bravo! Bravo! This is magnificent! But now it's not convincing, my friend, as I still must fuel my stoves and build with those same woods that you prize.
Burn peat in your stoves. Build your barn of stones, you understand? Yes, sometimes we cut wood out of necessity. But why be wanton? Why? Our forests fall before the axe. Billions of trees, all perishing, the homes of birds and beasts being laid waste. The level of the rivers falls and they dry up. Sublime landscapes disappear, never to return, because we haven't sense enough to bend down and pick fuel up from the ground. Isn't this so? What must human beings be to destroy what they can never create? God's given us reason and power of thought so that we may improve our lot. And what do we use these powers for but waste? We've destroyed our forests. Our rivers run dry. Our wildlife is all but extinct. Our climate ruined. And every day, wherever one looks, our life is more hideous. Oh, I see. You think me amusing. These seem to you the thoughts of some poor eccentric. Perhaps it's naive, too, on my part. Perhaps you think that, but I pass by the woods I've saved from the axe, and I hear the forest sighing. I planted that forest, and I think things may be in our power. You understand? Perhaps the climate itself is in our control. Why not? And if in 1,000 years people are happy, I will have played a part in that happiness. A small part.
So who's he talking to?
Yeah. He is talking to Helena.
Yeah.
And that's also, the shot was set up to give that impression too.
Right.
We can't see his eye, but she's framed in the shot.
Right, by the back of his head and Vanya's head. And
his eyes may have even been closed. We wouldn't know it, but yep.
Jesus, the look on Sonia's face.
Yeah. He sounds like a TV actor from the 60s.
I mean, he does have that voice, that that very, it's like if you took a cube out of concrete and then chipped away some of the edges, roughed up the edges a little bit. That's kind of what his voice sounds like to me.
Yeah. He is affectionate with all of his goodbyes. And then, with Sonia, he just reaches and grabs the bag.
I know. Yeah, he gives that's the direction of this, I think, is the acting is amazing. Mm-hmm. The direction is mind-blowing. Who Louis Malle chooses to focus on. And one of the clips that I put in here that we're not going to look at, though, is there's so many moments where you get to see another actor's face as another actor is giving a monologue. And you really get to watch what is happening for that actor in a way that I don't think you get to see in many traditional films. And it's almost impossible to see it in a theater because you're too far away.
You're too far away. The National Theater production of The Cherry Orchard does that a few times too. There's some interesting reaction shots but they're long lensed. And it is, in this case, he's putting us amidst the actors with the camera. I think the cinematography of this film is brilliant.
Yeah. And I did not get to go and see this production, but somebody I know did. And they were like, you're just sitting across the table from Julianne Moore. You could have reached across and touched her.
Yeah.
And I think that was the point, is to so put you in it.
Although better not, because if you touch Julianne Moore at age 32, you turn into alabaster and you're dead forever.
I want to do one more, because if we're gonna do three more, there's too much. So let's I also really want to point out the fact that you always hear New York City in the background.
Yep.
There are sirens and buses stopping and
part of being in this tumble down theater and hearing the sounds of New York. Again, I don't think we're meant to immerse in the story. We're meant to immerse in the performance.
Yeah, totally. So, the rap on Chekhov, is just usually when you get your first Chekhov text, you're like, what the fuck is happening here? Yeah. People are just saying weird shit. And and in this performance, you see stuff like that where like Nanny just comes on just clucking.
Yeah.
and it makes sense in this performance.
Well, and you made this point last time that the great performances come up with explanations for those things.
Right, exactly.
And that there are different explanations that can work. And that's part of the joy of watching a Chekhov performance is how are they going to explain this particular thing away?
This is the end of Act 2. We're going to watch all the way to the end of the act. It's about 3 minutes.
Okay.
But I think I don't know if I've seen a better rendition of how
this is great.
You should perform Chekhov, because like if you were to just look at the text of this without thinking about choices that you could make, you would come up with a very different scene than what Brooke God damn it.
Brooke
Smith. It is a very bland name.
Yeah. It is a bland name for a brilliant performer.
Yeah. I think you would
change your last name to something like Betancourt.
So we are going to watch all the way until Andre Gregory says, all right, let's take a break. But we're starting at 59:12. Are you ready?
All right.
Can I ask you something?
Yes.
But honestly, as a friend.
Yes.
Are you happy?
No.
I knew you weren't. And can I ask you something else? Wouldn't you have preferred to marry a younger husband?
Oh, what a schoolgirl you are.
Yeah. Well, wouldn't you have?
Yes.
This is so natural.
Yes, I should have liked that. All right, what else?
Do you like the doctor?
Very much.
Do I look funny?
It's just that even though
I also think the way Julianne Moore plays it, you see her character
over by the window, I can see him there.
Choosing
God, let me say
to be transparently honest in order to
Should
draw this out of Sonia.
Yeah,
do
totally.
I seem silly to you? Of course I do.
But she's
Tell
like,
me about him.
I'm going to give her something so she'll give me something.
Isn't he? Beyond that, he does things. He heals people, and he plants.
Oh, my dear, it's so much more than that.
It is. He plants a tree. When he plants it, he's trying to see what comes of his action in 1,000 years. 1,000 years. Do you know? He's thinking of the happiness of man. When you find such beautiful people,
she's affirming her attraction.
They must
Yeah.
be loved.
It's really generous.
He drinks.
Yes, he does.
He can be coarse. When you think of his life, he ministers to crude, barbarous folk, their poverty, their ignorance around him, constantly disease. A man who lives this life is... I wish you this happiness. With all my soul. You deserve happiness. I am a dull, second-rate character, you know. Throughout my whole life, that's what I've been. When you come to think of it, I am quite thoroughly unhappy. Why are you laughing?
I feel so happy.
Would you like me to play for you?
Yes, very much.
Yes?
Yes, I can't sleep.
Good.
Go ask your father. When he's ill, music sometimes upsets him. If it's all right, then I'll play.
All right.
Okay, Sonia leaves.
Oh, yeah.
The camera pulls in on Julianne Moore, who begins to cry.
She's having the emotional reaction to everything she just confessed to.
Yeah.
In the girl talk.
Yeah, Julianne Moore's Yelena, something horrible happened to her. And you never find out what, but something bad.
So long since I played. I'm playing that I'll cry like some damn fool.
She kind of puts herself back together.
He says we can't.
Okay, let's take a little break.
Most of what you're watching is people trying to offload the tension that they go around in their lives with.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's what this play is about. Like this like weird summer that is like tossed into disarray, and everybody's lives are sort of fucked up and made stranger and more dramatic. And like the doctor is trying to seduce Yelena, and so is Vanya, and Sonia is trying to get with the doctor. And like something frees them of the constraints that has been in place for their lives. And you're mostly watching them try to deal with that. And I think with all of the characters, you get this sense of, it's like the Hemingway, like you only see what's above the water. It's the Hemingway iceberg thing.
Yeah.
And I think what is amazing about this production is that you get the sense that all of these characters are dragging around with them this huge emotional sorrow. Sonia's is that she's plain and that she's probably not going to get what she wants. Vanya's is that he's wasted his life. The professor's is that he's been excluded. He has been cast out. I think something horrible has happened to Yelena that she is incredibly ashamed of, because she makes so many points in the end of the play to be like, think of me kindly. I'm better than you think. I'm not going to succumb to what you're like. In spite of herself, she is resisting herself.
Well, yeah, it's not quite my interpretation. My interpretation of her is she is somebody who has decided to allow her beauty to lead her to a comfortable life and despises the cowardice in herself that has made that decision but can't overcome it. And you get that when, everyone's like, well, why don't you minister to the sick? And she's like, I can't. And why can't she? It's cowardice. It's a lack of courage. And I think it's a very realistic type of character that we see in our world too, where somebody whose beauty or some other form of privilege has gotten them up on some ledge, and they know that they're lucky to be there, and therefore they fear doing anything else that might upset it. And then within that, I think Elena is a really interesting character because she tries to behave ethically. And she tries to behave ethically in spite of her baser instincts, and specifically her attraction to the doctor, which I think is, I would say, probably the best choice, apart from casting Wallace Shawn as Vanya, is to make the attraction that she feels to the doctor a little more explicit than it is on the page. Because so then when she goes to the doctor and says, like, don't you like, how do you feel about Sonia? She's doing it for the right reason. She's doing it as a kindness to Sonia. But when he responds the way he responds, I actually thought that was the smartest decision of this production. And because the way it reads on the page, and I think particularly the phrase at one point where the doctor says, like, devour me, you tiger. It feels like an episode of Three's Company or Friends, where somebody, and I think you said this last time, wildly misinterprets what's happening. But if the doctor actually isn't entirely misinterpreting, if he's picking up something that is really there, then that scene becomes a lot more interesting. And it does also, Yelena's, one of the questions of this play that Vanya raises very explicitly is, should Helena have an affair? Would she be happier if she has an affair? And there's a certain form of, both of the men want her to, and they both want to because of their own desire, but they also make a sort of philosophical argument, you're too young to be saddled with that old windbag. And I actually think it's, I think there's something kind of noble about Yelena's character that she chooses not to do that. that she chooses to honor the decision that she made, even if it has led to unhappiness. And that's also like super Russian. And so I actually thought of all of the characters, hers was the one that kind of came to life for me the most in this production. Vanya also, but I kind of expected that because Vanya's got that crusty pug-like quality on the page too. But yeah, I agree. I think Julianne Moore plays all of this really, really brilliant. It's a really hard role to play too. And one of the things she has to do is plausibly kind of fend Vanya off while still being affectionate, because on the page, she seems fond of him, even though she keeps refusing his advances. And I think she plays that very convincingly too. You get the sense of she's amused by this fellow. She likes this fellow. She feels affectionate, and she's lonely, and she likes his company. But A, she's not attracted to him, and B, she's going to be loyal to her husband come hell or high water. And I think Julianne Moore carries all of that brilliantly.
And some of his advances are too much. And when they are too much, I mean, she
gets annoyed, right?
Yeah,
right. She gets annoyed. But she doesn't
God,
really...
you disgust me is one of her, like...
But then it's okay 5 minutes later, right? She doesn't... She's not like, that... You could imagine being in a situation where somebody advances on you or you advance on somebody and it goes too far and you're like, it'll be awkward with me and this person for the rest of our life. And that's not what happens. She puts him in his place, and then they're kind of back to where they were again.
And that's why I think this film is so wild, because like when you're, like you get a text and you're like, okay, how am I going to do this in a way that it's like affecting and dramatic and emotional?
I just thought you were talking about an SMS, and I was like, you're like, I get a text from my mom, and I'm like, how am I going to respond to this in a way that is affecting and convincing and emotional?
Well, and
then I realized what you were talking about.
I mean, that is kind of my life. Like, I'm like, oh, okay, how are we going to respond to this? And
some athlete wants to know, like, whether he can up his mileage. How do I respond to this in a way that's affecting, and emotional,
and dramatic?
and dramatic. No, you may not.
It's not. That's not.
You
far
will
off.
strain your tendon.
I mean, like, I do cover the things that I say with a sort of slightly put upon bigness that is part of the joke. And like, if you get the joke, you are likely to be my friend. And if you don't, you probably think I'm a weirdo. That's kind of the way that it's going. But like, but
anyway, you receive the text of the play. I interrupted you with my misunderstanding.
And you look at all of these moments and you think about, how can I make this dramatic? And I think that the choices that they generally make are, how can we make this seem real? And so you do have these moments where she says, God, you disgust me. And then 5 minutes later, it's fine. Or he hears that and backs off, but he sort of makes a joke out of it. That Wallace Shawn does this hilarious Quasimodo kind of thing where he sort of is like, he's like, I'm sorry. I'll go pick you some flowers. Sad autumn roses.
And it works, right? She gets
a laugh. Yeah. And then which deepens the tragedy even more when he comes back with the roses and catches the doctor making out with Yelena, even though she doesn't want him to do that. So she kind of wants him to do it. She
wants it and she doesn't want it.
Yeah.
But I think also in the performance, what you see her is resist the kiss, then surrender to it briefly, and then resist again. That's what I picked up in that. That she doesn't want it to happen, but then she starts to enjoy it. Then she catches herself and pushes him away, and then she really pushes him away when she sees. And again, that's a kind of wonderful sort of performance. There's a moment like that in the movie The Wrestler, and I want to say, is it Marissa Tomei and Mickey Rourke, where he kisses her in a bar and she likes it and then realizes it's a bad idea. It actually reminds me very much of that moment too. Well performed. I have one more question for you, if I may, or did you have?
Let's do it. No.
So And unfortunately, I don't have a. I wish I had some kind of chalkboard we could do this with, like a virtual chalkboard. But I want to do the Kurt Vonnegut plot mapping.
Oh my God. Okay.
And so, if you remember, it's pretty simple, right? You have good and bad.
Yep.
Zeros in the middle, and that's on the vertical, and then you have time on. So where do we start? What is the trajectory, and where do we end, in your opinion? I have my map, and I'm curious, but I have a feeling that your map and my map will start similarly and end slightly differently.
God. Okay. We start. We start at the y-intercept. We start at even.
Okay.
We are neither good nor bad. Like things have been a little helter-skelter, but it's early enough in Yelena and the professor's tenure at the estate that things haven't really gotten that bad yet.
Okay.
I think things take a real downturn in Act Two. I have a question in the rundown here about the tone of Act Two that I don't think we're going to get to. I think the tone of Act Two is it is a chaotic, bitter, and cynical 30 minutes. It is nuts, the shit that goes down. Yelena and the professor start making out at one point, and it seems real. And she asks him, "What do you want from me?" And he says, "Nothing." And she takes it as nothing. And you're like, oh my. Act Two, I think, is the low point. I think we are trending upward in Act Three, but if Act Two is a sort of cesspool of bitterness and cynicism, Act Three is a sort of seismic chart of like, maybe this is good, this is not good. Maybe this is good. Oh my God, this is not good. And I think we end pretty far down, but maybe to the same depths of Act Two. And then I think so. We've gone down. We've sort of come up,
but then we
a
come up a little bit
in a sort of shaky line, and then there are two dotted lines that diverge from the end of Act Three. One is we're going to pretend that everything's fine, and then the real line, which is just basically horizontal and maybe a few steps down from the y-intercept of things are really not that great.
Yeah.
I don't think we ever get positive integers.
No. I think we see where I disagree with you. I was pretty similar, but where I disagree is I would start us at like -1 because like basically the doctor's like, I'm burned out, I'm tired. Vanya's like, I'm old. Why did I age? Why haven't I done? I mean, and we start with discontent, and then I would say I see kind of straight decline from Act 2 to Act 3. To me, the failure of the, intervening on Sonia's behalf with the doctor, and then the failure of the announcement leading to the attempted murder is a low point.
Yeah.
Arguably, perhaps a low point that was necessary. Certainly at that point, once those two bad things happen, everything is surfaced, and then things recover, but I think they recover to like -2. So I think we start at -1, we get a big V down, and then they recover to a little bit worse than they were before. And worse than they were before only because people have a little less hope than they did. Like prior to that, maybe there was some hope that things would get better, but everyone kind of made their play, as pathetic as it was. Now, I don't know if Chekhov would agree with me or not. Maybe I'm projecting on this, but like I don't find any. Maybe Chekhov is saying that these characters deserve what they get. That seems a little cruel. But part of the reason I say I don't think it's a great story is that I think that story is actually change. I don't actually see any of the characters change. I think, except for maybe being honest with the world around them about who they are and what they want, I don't see them changing. And it is very, very hard for me to sympathize with an unhappy person who isn't willing to change. And I would even say that like that that harshness I have an attitude I would even apply to myself. Like sometimes I am that unhappy person who won't change, and I get pissed at myself about it. And so that is like what I ultimately find unsatisfying about this story. And I suppose you can make, and you've made the case that the emotional realism is the point. The point is that it's not a good story. The point is that we're telling a story about people who don't change and are unhappy, and maybe they deserve to have their story. And I'm open to that. I don't ultimately find it satisfying as a story, but as I said to you before, I think the framing device of this movie obviates that problem because we are invited to immerse in the performances, which are wonderful.
Yeah, like it's going to be a hard sell to get The Little Engine That Tried published.
But Chekhov did like 4 times.
Yeah. Because I think that by the time you were at middle life,
I just think of like Chekhov stories for children.
Yeah. The
little bear that had a heart attack,
Like the itsy bitsy spider is pretty bad anyway, because you're like, wait, what? It just gets washed down the drain.
Sylvester and the magic pebble that turned him in a stone, and there he stayed for the rest of his life, forever into eternity until the world ended. And his parents were sad until they died, but then they went to heaven.
But the point, I completely agree with you that but Oedipus isn't a great story either. Like we know where we're going the whole time. And there is
in this or in Oedipus,
and we're talking about like performances and plays where the intent is to arouse in the audience empathetic emotion.
Right.
That's what we're here for, to experience like
the empathetic emotion with Oedipus is the empathy of being trapped, right?
Yeah, right.
And here, well, I mean, what do you feel like we're rooting for?
The thing we are rooting for is for people's attempts to improve their existences, that they might pay off.
Yeah.
But of course they can't.
They can't because they're grounded in magical thinking, Vanya's not going to make it with Yelena. Sonia's not going to make it with the doctor. Even if she did, she wouldn't be happy because he's not actually suited for her. He's just the only man who's not her uncle or father that she knows. Yelena is, and I think Yelena doesn't even attempt to be happy. She just endures,
The things that are happening to the other characters in this play, you get the sense Yelena went through it when she married the professor, because we get that amazing speech where she's like, it wasn't real. And I think that this is a play about projections, about like saddling other people with the responsibility to save you. And of course, and
if any of them get what they want, they're going to be unhappy. Like if their romantic attempt succeeds, there's, if Vanya somehow seduces Yelena, all he's going to do is break up a marriage, and they're not going to be, she doesn't really like him that way. Same thing with the doctor. Yeah. I mean, I think you could interpret the doctor again as like dashing, but in that sense, like maybe the casting of Larry Pine is good because he does come across as sophomoric, and maybe that actually helps the point that we're making here. That these characters are they basically are all engaged in kind of magical thinking about what's going to make them happy.
Well,
should we go to trivia?
Yeah, let's go to trivia. Louis Malle has a long, illustrious, and strange career. I couldn't verify this one, so I didn't put this in my trivia. Here's a nice little extra beat. Apparently, he was a huge James Bond expert.
Oh,
like on the films of Bond, but I couldn't get enough detail to make me think that it wasn't fake or something like that.
What an interesting thing to have as an expertise for a kind of experimental arty filmmaker.
I know, that's why. Yeah. Like there's like 40 minutes where I was like, I have to find out more about this, but I couldn't. So in his very early career, he worked as sort of like an assistant, like cameraman, like not a cinematographer or anything else, with a great figure of French cinema. Was that director and movie Jean-Luc Godard's Breathless, Francois Truffaut's The 400 Blows, or Jacques Cousteau's Le Monde du Silence? The Silent World. What a film name.
Yeah. For some reason, I don't see the trajectory as working with Jacques Cousteau. I'm going to say Truffaut.
It was Cousteau.
Ah! Well, that's cool. I love Jacques Cousteau's films, and they make me nostalgic because I can remember like watching them with my grandparents, and they're all shot on 16 millimeter, which is a very like mid-century look. Yeah. But that's cool.
The clue there was that I guess Louis Malle was really known for the silence in his films, which you can really see in this one. And apparently that is something he learned from Cousteau.
All right. So Larry Pine who plays the Doctor, had a very memorable role in House of Cards, where he plays the congressional speaker of the House.
Yes.
And there is a memorable scene in which they are in the House of Representatives bathroom, and he pulls out his penis. We don't see it, but we're given to understand as a way of intimidating Kevin Spacey's character, who is the VP at the time. This is based on a real power broker who was known to use his penis size to intimidate political rivals.
Oh my God.
So was the power broker who inspired Larry Pine's character's alpha male behavior in House of Cards A, Robert Moses, the urban planner who was responsible for many of New York City Metro's infrastructure projects, and he used to invite people he was trying to influence to go skinny dipping with him in his pool and then make fun of their equipment? B, Ric Flair, the wrestler, who would expose himself to other wrestlers backstage as an alpha male intimidation tactic. Or C, Lyndon Johnson, who was known to do this both as senator and president as a means of establishing dominance when he was trying to convince somebody to pass some legislation or support some legislation.
Good God. The world we live in is a terrible place. This is like you've done this thing where you've drawn back the curtain and like Cthulhu is back there.
Yeah.
Like that really the great old ones are running the show with their tentacles.
Or really just your middle school bully.
God damn it. Jesus, it's so much darker when it's middle-aged men.
Yeah.
Fuck.
All middle school bullies grow up to be middle-aged men, or most of them do. Some of them die young.
Yeah. Oh man, if Roy Cohn had been one of them, I was going to go with that. God, the Lyndon Johnson one feels like it feels wrong, so it feels right. So I'm going to go with Robert Moses.
It was Lyndon Johnson.
Damn it.
Lyndon Johnson not only did the thing in the urinal, but also did the skinny dipping thing that I attributed to Robert Moses, which was a little bit of misdirection because the Alec Baldwin character from the film version of Motherless Brooklyn is based on Robert Moses, and there's a scene in a pool. And I will say that Ric Flair also did expose his penis to wrestlers backstage, but it was not for purposes of intimidation. It was just
purposes of Ric Flair.
Just good, clean fun.
Yeah. Dukes, what's up next?
Up next is the first half of Gary Steingart's Chekhovian novel, Our Country Friends, which was published in 2021. It's actually a pandemic novel. It was the best pandemic novel I read. So read the first half, and we'll talk about it next time.
And where does it take place? Because this, I need to set up my joke in the credits.
It takes place in a professor's estate in upstate New York, when everybody in New York City is locked down.
Well, thanks for listening, everybody. Upper Middle Brow is a Small Point production. Chris Bagg and Jesse Dukes have never gathered in upstate New York, oddly enough.
Nope.
Music by Ben Pajak and Jesse Dukes. Design and website by me, Chris Bagg. You can learn more about us and find our listener survey at uppermiddlebrow.com. And don't forget to please review us in your podcast app so other people can find our show.
And a reminder, Chris and I are both writers and editors and can help you with your writing, podcasting, or editing project. You can see some of our portfolios and learn more at our respective websites, chrisbagg.com and jessedukes.com. Good night, everybody. Thanks for hanging with us tonight.
Yeah, this is a fun one, even though slightly chaotic.
A bit chaotic, but it'll work.
Yeah.